Hello friends, let's now talk about variables in C. A variable is a memory location that stores a value and is given a name. In other words, it is a word in our program that represents a particular value. We use variables to make our values more meaningful and accessible in our program. For example, you may have different values at a given point in your program, but you will get confused if you can't remember what each of these values represents, and you may also have difficulties keeping track of all the exact values which may be changing throughout the program. But when they are stored in variables, you just need to know only the variable names. Now let's see a situation where you will need to work with some values in your program. For example, we will have two main values initially, let's say 10 and 11. Now 10 may represent the age of a person that you just met, while 11 can be the person's favorite number. And when working with these numbers, it's going to get confusing if you forget after some time what each of these numbers represents. So that is why you will usually have to store them inside variables. And when I mean storing them inside variables, it simply means we are going to write words that are going to represent these values so that you can simply access the values passing through the words. Like here at 10, I will simply write H to know that this 10 means H, and I will set equal to before the 10. So when I say H equals 10, it means I am storing the value 10 inside H, and each time I see 10, I will know that it is the age of the person, or I may just see the word H and I know that it contains a value inside of it. And before writing the name H, I will have to write the data type of this value, which is going to be int for this example. So the data type is simply a keyword or a word that represents the type of values that we can store in a given variable. For example, integer, which is the data type we have here represented by int, is a data type which tells our compiler that this variable called H can only store integer numbers. Integer numbers in programming are generally whole numbers with no decimal points. Now I am going to go to my next line, and then I will do the same thing for the second value, which is 11. So for 11, I want it to represent a person's favorite number. So I will say fav for favorite and then underscore number. And then I will say equal to 11. Let me also remember my semicolon at the end, because most lines in C end with a semicolon. And favorite number is equal to 11. I will need to also give it a data type. I will just say int for now. There are many other data types we can use in C, which we are going to see shortly. But for now, let's continue with integer because it is very easy to work with. Now, if I want to print these values, for example, I can simply use my printf message. Now in my printf message, I've written a message H equals %G and then favorite number equals %G. So our %G we have here is known as a format specifier in C, and a format specifier is simply a placeholder for variables when we want to print variables inside our printf function. So what happens is that this format specifier %G, at the time we are executing our program, it is going to be replaced by the actual value of the variable which we want to be displayed here. But in order for our compiler to know which value or variable value we want to replace our format specifier at the time we execute the program, we will need to come at the end of our closing double quote and we write a comma. Then I'm going to specify the variable value which I want to be displayed in that position. And in my example, I want the H to be displayed where the first format specifier %G is. And for the second format specifier, the second %G, I want it to be replaced by my second variable, which is favorite number. Now we should also take note that every different data type in C has its own format specifier, which we are going to also see later on in the video. But for now, let's continue with what we have. We can simply run our program now and we will see the values being displayed. So here we see age equals 10 and favorite number equals 11. Now we see that our values 10 and 11 are not just random values, but they are actually given meaningful names that we can easily use to access these values. And also note that not just every type of word can be given as a variable name. There are some rules that our variable names must respect. Now the first rule is that a variable name can only contain letters, underscores and numbers, and they must begin by a letter or an underscore, not a number. So we can't have a variable name like 2h, for example. This is not an appropriate variable name. In fact, it is going to give an error if we try to execute a program with this variable name. The second rule for variables is that they shouldn't contain spaces in between them. If we have a variable name with multiple words, like our second variable name favorite number, we can use an underscore to link the words together, because it is inappropriate to have a variable name with spaces in between the name like this. If we don't want to use the underscore, what we can do is that we simply write the first word of the variable name in all lowercase characters, and then for the second word or any subsequent word, we write its first letter in uppercase and the remaining letters in lowercase. So we see favorite number, we are going to read this as favorite as the first word, or FAV for favorite, and then the second word begins from number where the capital N is represented. Another rule for naming variables is that variable names cannot be reserved words or keywords in C programming language. A keyword or reserved word is simply a word that is already inbuilt into our programming language to mean or represent something specific. For example, we can easily determine keywords just from our IDE by looking at the words that are colored in special colors, like int is a keyword, for example, so we cannot have a variable name that is int again, or return, which is another keyword, meaning that we cannot have a variable called return, because these are words that are already used by our C language. Like you see, if I try to name this variable return, we will have int return, and this cannot work. So we see that an error is given because we are trying to give a variable name which is a keyword in the C language. And finally, we should also note that variable names are case sensitive. What we mean by that is that variable names are very strict with the lower and uppercase characters inside the variable name. Like here we have a variable called h, for example. We see that all the h characters are written in lowercase, but if we want to try to write h in another place in our program, like in our printf function, and I decide to write h with one of the letters being capitalized, like with a capital E, for example, this is not the same thing, because h in all lowercase is different from h with one uppercase character. So we need to always maintain the variable name exactly the way it is written everywhere in order for it to be considered as the same variable. Now if I run this again, we see that it gives another error because it doesn't recognize this new name h with a capital E. So I will change this back to a lowercase e. So those are the different rules for naming variables in C. Now what we have done here is that we have simply declared and initialized a variable at the same time. Declaring a variable means creating the variable to make it exist in our program, while initializing it means storing a value inside of the variable. So here we see that we create the variable by saying int h, and then we initialize it by giving it or storing the value 10 in it. We can also decide to declare and initialize our variables separately. Like for example, if we did not know what we wanted our h to be, I could simply first declare the h as int h and with a semicolon at the end, and then I come below here and I can initialize the variable by giving it any value, but simply by accessing the variable name h, and then I will set it to a specific value now. Now, even when I have already initialized the variable, I can still access the same variable by writing its name and then giving it another value, and this is still going to work. And the most recent modification of this variable is going to be considered the current variable value, meaning that if we run our program, we will see that the age is displayed as 23 because 23 was the most recent update we made on the age variable. So that is how to work with variables in C.